In this video, I'm going to show you a really useful tool in Excel called the pivot table. Pivot tables are useful for aggregating data in different ways. You've been using the COUNTIF, COUNTIFs, and AVERAGEIFs functions to do a lot of these things, but in many situations, a pivot table can do the same thing, but a lot faster. So you might have been looking at questions like, how many projects were in the nonfiction category and ended in year 2012 and met their funding goal? This project in row 7 did not meet its funding goal. I have an if statement here in this column that checks to see if the pledged amount was greater than or equal to the goal amount. And if it was, I put a 1. Anyway, you have been writing functions like this to answer questions like the one I just explained. But now I'm going to show you how to do some of those things a little bit faster with a pivot table. So to use the pivot table, you just click somewhere in the data set. On a PC, the pivot table is available on the Insert menu. On a Mac, look for a pivot table option on the Data menu. If you can't find it, search in the help for pivot table. So here I'm going to click on pivot table, and if you're clicked somewhere in the data set, then it usually makes a very good guess about the range, and then the default is that we'll put the pivot table on a new worksheet. So those are what I want, so I'm just going to say OK. So here I am on a new worksheet with a blank pivot table. It's like a canvas. Over here on the side, I have the pivot table fields, the field list. If it's not showing, look for an item called field list, or sometimes it's called pivot table builder. So what can I do with this? Well, here we have all of the fields in the data set. Those come from the first row of the data. So for example, I can click on category, and it will give me all of the categories in this data set. It put that in the row section of the field list. I can drag the category field over to values, and it gives me a count. So it tells me that there were 271 animation projects and 898 art projects. I can find out of the animation projects and the art projects and all the other categories how many of them met their goal. So I'm putting the pledged greater than or equal to goal field in the values. So I see that 178 out of 271 of the projects in the animation category met their funding goal. So your first question on your study questions for the quiz is, what percentage of all crafts projects reach their funding goal? All right, so I see crafts down here. There were 185 of them, and 139 of them met their goal. So I could calculate the percentage that way. Another thing I could do is, instead of looking at the sum of this column, I can find the value field settings for that field in my pivot table. So look for value field settings on your version of Excel, and I can change it from the sum to the average. So because I have this column set up as a 0 for didn't meet the goal and a 1 for did meet the goal, the average value of that column for each of the categories gives me the percent of projects in that category that met the goal. So since that's a percent, I'm going to go back to my value field settings and change the number format to be a percent. Okay, so there we have the answer to the first question on the study guide. What percentage of all crafts projects reach their funding goal? 75.14%. And we also have an easy answer to question 2. Did a higher percentage of video games projects or jazz projects reach their funding goal? So I just have to find jazz and video games on here. So for jazz, it was 88.25%. And for video games, it was only 46.41%. So clearly a higher percentage of the jazz projects met their goal. Now let's look at the answer to question 3. What percentage of all conceptual art projects ending in 2012 reached their funding goal? So scrolling back up, I see conceptual art, and overall 86.36% of them met their goal, but I want to have this broken out by year. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the end year to my table. I find it on my field list, there it is. I'm going to try clicking on it and see where it goes in the table. It might not go where I want it to. It didn't. Where did it go? It summed up the end year for each category. That doesn't make sense in this case. Where would I like it? I could either put it in the columns, or in this case, I'm going to put it as a second level in the rows. So you can see what we have. For each category, I see it broken out by end year. So that this question is asking about conceptual art ending in 2012, and there's the answer, 70.83%. So some of you will find that this is a lot faster than writing count ifs and average ifs statements. It takes a little getting used to, but I encourage you to play around with it and see if you like it.